Clash of Cultures, the Surge of Anti-Muslim Sentiment in Europe. Written by Urshia Malik. In recent years, Europe has seen a massive influx of Islamic immigrants, primarily driven by conflicts and crises in the Middle East. These immigrant communities often adhere to traditional Islamic customs and norms, clashing with the liberal and secular values of the host countries. This has ignited debates over the limits of multiculturalism and whether European societies can absorb large numbers of immigrants without compromising their cultural identity. With approximately 25 million Muslims now living in the 28 nations of the European Union, the presence of Islam has become a central issue, provoking fear, hostility, and divided opinions within host societies. Surveys reveal that many Europeans perceive Muslims as a potential threat to their national identity, security, and social cohesion. This climate has fueled the rise of right-wing populism, with hardline leaders in countries like Poland, Hungary, the Netherlands, Italy, Sweden, and Denmark embracing strong anti-immigration rhetoric, mainly targeting those from Muslim-majority countries. Their concerns about the impact of Islamic culture on European values and security resonate with growing segments of the population and deserve closer examination in the following discussion. These concerns are not entirely unfounded, as we shall soon explore. Recent influx and demographic impact. The Muslim presence in Europe dates to the early 8th century when Muslims conquered parts of the northern Mediterranean. They established caliphates and emirates in regions like the Iberian Peninsula for over 7 centuries. Muslim rule in Spain ended with the fall of the Emirate of Granada in 1492, followed by the expulsion of Muslims, Sephardi Jews, and converted Spaniards during the Inquisition. At the same time, the Ottomans, who had embraced Islam, defeated the Greeks, took Anatolia, captured Constantinople in 1453, renaming it Istanbul, and expanded into the Balkans. The Balkan states gained independence in the early 20th century after the Ottoman Empire dissolved following World War I. Unlike the expulsion of Muslims from Spain, Islamic communities in places like Bosnia, Albania, and Kosovo remained, becoming part of Europe's long-standing Muslim population today. However, over the past several decades, Europe has experienced a significant surge in asylum seekers due to various crises and political instabilities in the Middle East. Muslims currently make up about 5% of Europe's population. This proportion is projected to increase significantly in the coming decades, potentially more than doubling by 2050, depending on migration patterns. France and Germany have the largest Muslim populations in Europe, with France hosting 5.7 million Muslims, 8.8% of the population, and Germany 5 million, 6.1%. The United Kingdom is expected to see its Muslim population nearly double from 2.9 million in 2010 to 5.6 million by 2030, representing 8.2% of its population. Migration has been a significant driver of the growth of the Muslim population in Europe. However, even without further migration, the Muslim population would still increase due to higher birth rates among Muslim communities compared to non-Muslim ones. Muslims in Europe are generally younger than their non-Muslim counterparts, with a median age of 30.4 years compared to 43.8 years for non-Muslims. This younger demographic contributes to higher birth rates among Muslims. Muslim women in Europe have higher fertility rates, 2.6 children per woman, compared to non-Muslim women, 1.6 children per woman, which will also contribute to the growing Muslim population in the coming years. In Russia, Muslims are concentrated in specific regions, with significant populations in the Volga and southern federal districts. This concentration is expected to remain stable, with Muslims making up a notable percentage of the population in these areas. The increase in the Muslim population has led to political and social changes, including the rise of political parties advocating for stricter immigration controls and groups opposing the Islamization of Europe. Right-wing populism in Europe. The rise of right-wing populism in Europe has been accompanied by strong rhetoric from hardliners in several countries, particularly on issues related to immigration, cultural integration, and national identity. In countries like Poland, Hungary, the Netherlands, Italy, Sweden, and Denmark, right-wing leaders have made statements that reflect their firm stance against immigration, particularly from Muslim-majority countries, and their concerns about the impact of Islamic culture on European values and security. France. The 2015 Paris attacks were a turning point in French politics, leading to a surge in support for the National Front, now National Rally. The attackers, many of whom were French citizens of immigrant descent, were motivated by radical Islamist ideology. The attacks highlighted the challenges of integrating Muslim populations in France and led to increased support for policies aimed at restricting immigration and promoting secularism. Germany. The mass sexual assaults in Cologne on New Year's Eve 2015, apparently carried out by groups of men of North African and Arab descent, shocked the nation. The incident was a catalyst for the rise of the Alternative for Germany, AfD, a right-wing party that capitalized on the public's fears and frustrations. The AfD's success in subsequent elections was partly driven by its anti-immigration stance and criticism of Chancellor Angela Merkel's open-door policy towards refugees. Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party, PiS, has taken a firm stance against accepting refugees, particularly from Muslim-majority countries. The party's leader, Jarosław Kaczynski, has argued that accepting Muslim refugees would threaten Poland's cultural and national identity. Kaczynski has also expressed concerns about the potential for terrorism, claiming that refugees could bring diseases and that their presence would lead to the dilution of Polish culture. The Polish government has consistently resisted EU pressure to accept quotas of refugees, framing the issue as a defense of national sovereignty and Christian values. Under Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, Hungary has been at the forefront of opposition to immigration in Europe. Orbán has frequently stated that Muslim immigration threatens the Christian roots of Europe and has described the influx of refugees as an invasion. He has also claimed that multiculturalism has failed in Western Europe and that Hungary must protect itself from the dangers of Islamic terrorism and the erosion of national identity. Hungary built a border fence during the 2015 migrant crisis to prevent refugees from entering the country, and Orbán has promoted the idea of illiberal democracy, which prioritizes national sovereignty and cultural homogeneity over liberal democratic values. In the Netherlands, Geert Wilders, leader of the Party for Freedom, PVV, has been one of the most vocal critics of Islam and immigration in Europe. Wilders has called for a complete halt to immigration from Muslim-majority countries and has proposed closing all mosques in the Netherlands. He has described Islam as an existential threat to Western civilization and has likened the Quran to Hitler's Mein Kampf. He advocates the de-Islamization of the Netherlands, and he wants no mosques or Islamic schools in the country. Wilders' rhetoric has contributed to a broader debate in the Netherlands about the limits of tolerance and the challenges of integrating Muslim immigrants into Dutch society. In Italy, Matteo Salvini, leader of the League Party and former deputy prime minister, has been a prominent figure in the anti-immigration movement. Salvini has campaigned on a platform of Italians first, and his party has consistently opposed immigration from Africa and the Middle East. He called for the closure of Italy's ports to migrant rescue ships and has described immigrants as a threat to Italy's security and cultural identity. Italy's current Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, has also adopted a hard line against Islamic immigration. She has noted that there is a process of Islamization in Europe that is very distant from the values of our civilization and said, "I believe there is a problem of compatibility between Islamic culture or a certain interpretation of Islamic culture and the rights and values of our civilization." Her government has launched a crackdown on immigration, passing measures to give authorities the power to detain migrants for as long as 18 months and ordering the construction of new centers to house them. Sweden, traditionally known for its liberal immigration policies, has seen a significant shift in public opinion due to concerns over crime and integration issues related to immigrants. The Sweden Democrats, SD, a right-wing nationalist party, have argued that Sweden's immigration policies have failed and that the country is at risk of becoming another country due to the influence of Islamic culture. He has called for a complete stop to asylum immigration and for the deportation of immigrants who do not integrate into Swedish society. The party has also linked immigration to rising crime rates, particularly gang violence. Denmark has taken some of the most stringent measures in Europe to limit immigration and integrate immigrants into Danish society. The leaders of the Danish People's Party, DPP, have argued that Denmark must preserve its cultural identity and have pushed for policies that restrict the rights of immigrants, such as the controversial jewelry law, which allows the state to confiscate valuables from asylum seekers to cover their costs. Danish politicians have also introduced measures to limit the influence of Islam in public life, such as banning the burqa and restricting the construction of mosques. Islamic terrorist activities and security concerns. A major driver of right-wing sentiment in Europe has been the rise in terrorist activities linked to radical Islam. Several high-profile attacks, such as the 2004 Madrid train bombings, the 2015 Charlie Hebdo and Bataclan attacks in Paris, the 2016 Brussels bombings, and the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing, have left a deep scar on the European psyche. These incidents, often perpetrated by homegrown extremists or recent immigrants, have fueled fears that Islamic immigration is bringing with it a threat to European security. The inability of governments have been unable to prevent such attacks and adequately vetting incoming immigrants has led to a backlash, with right-wing parties advocating for stricter immigration controls, enhanced security measures, and, in some cases, outright bans on Muslim immigration. Grooming gangs. The emergence of grooming gangs in the UK, particularly in cities like Rotherham, Rochdale, and Telford, has further stoked anti-immigrant sentiment. Investigations have revealed that these gangs, often composed of men of Pakistani and Bangladeshi descent, exploited vulnerable young girls, primarily white, for sexual abuse over several years. The authorities' initial reluctance to address the issue, allegedly due to fears of being labeled racist, exacerbated public outrage. These scandals have rattled European societies, with right-wing groups capitalizing on the failures of multiculturalism and the dangers of unchecked immigration. They argue that cultural differences, particularly concerning attitudes towards women and children, have created environments where such crimes can occur. Sharia-controlled regions and parallel societies. In some European cities, certain neighborhoods have been described as no-go zones, where Sharia law is said to operate informally. While the extent and reality of these claims are often debated, the perception that there are areas in Europe where state law is secondary to religious law has been a powerful tool for right-wing rhetoric. These neighborhoods are often seen as emblematic of the failure of integration policies. They are used to argue that Islamic immigrants are not assimilating into European culture but rather imposing their own. Radicalization of Muslim communities. Orthodox Islamic preachers, both within Europe and abroad, have played a role in radicalizing segments of the Muslim population. These preachers often promote a strict interpretation of Islam that is at odds with Western values. Through mosques, community centers, and online platforms, they have been able to reach and influence young, disillusioned Muslims, who may feel marginalized or alienated in European societies. Economic hardship, social exclusion, and discrimination are often mentioned as reasons why the Muslim community might be more vulnerable to extremist ideas. However, such arguments do not really make sense since other immigrant communities face similar challenges but don't usually turn to violence like the Muslim community does. Post-war Muslim migration, impact and challenges. After World War II, many Muslims moved to Europe, and today, they make up a significant portion of the Muslim population in the European Union. European countries dealing with labor shortages during post-war rebuilding invited people from their former colonies to come and work. This led to the migration of hundreds of thousands of North Africans, mainly Berbers, from the Rif Mountains in rural areas to France. Indonesians and Surinamese went to the Netherlands, while Indians, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis moved to the United Kingdom. In the 1950s and 1960s, many labor migrants in Europe were Muslims from North African and Middle Eastern countries that Europeans had colonized. They came seeking jobs, better living conditions, and higher wages. Most intended to return home after saving money and sending a large portion of their earnings back to their families. Their work played a key role in Europe's economic growth, especially in industries like construction and mining. Until the early 1970s, these migrants were largely unnoticed and didn't face much discrimination. However, as the economy changed, migration laws became stricter, leading many migrants to bring their families over instead. This resulted in significant demographic changes, with more women and children joining the migrants. As families settled, there was a growing demand for mosques and cultural spaces, increasing immigrant communities' visibility and cohesion. The consequences of labor migration in Europe were multifaceted. The influx of guest workers led to demographic changes in certain neighborhoods, forming distinct communities, read Muslim ghettos, around shared ethnicities, languages, traditions, and religious practices. Initially, guest workers contributed significantly to European economies by filling labor gaps due to the aging native population and low birth rates. However, there were no concrete plans to integrate and assimilate the immigrants beyond a certain point. Language barriers, cultural differences, and social isolation posed challenges. Some guest workers struggled to access education, healthcare, and housing. Second-generation immigrants faced identity dilemmas. The government's flimsy plans to integrate the laborers got sidelined when the Middle East crisis broke out, and the illegals started pouring in from the Mediterranean shores and walking towards European cities. After years, the governments have shed any pretensions about laborers and are openly housing and feeding them using taxpayer money. As Muslim communities grew, tensions emerged. Debates around multiculturalism, secularism, and religious freedom intensified. Issues like headscarf bans, mosque construction, and cultural assimilation sparked debates. For many, the question of identity arose. Were they guest workers, immigrants, or European citizens? Balancing cultural roots with national identity became crucial. Barriers to assimilation. The major roadblock to Muslim assimilation in Europe is the clash between European secular values and conservative Islamic practices. European secularism expects religion to be a private matter, conflicting with the comprehensive role of Islam in public and private life. However, Islam often resists this compartmentalization. Also, Islam, compared to other faiths, tends to be much less flexible in adapting to secularizing pressures. Attempts to relegate it solely to the private sphere face stiff resistance. Even moderate scholars like Tariq Ramadan are sometimes considered too conservative in Europe. European nations were historically founded as ethnic nation-states with nationalism at their core. This makes the assimilation of Muslims challenging, as their cultural and religious identities intersect with national narratives. Laws restricting Islamic symbols in the public sphere can fuel political distrust and a sense of injustice among Muslims. Economic instability, underemployment, identity issues, and the racist attitudes of the host societies make integration a difficult proposition. Another factor that complicates assimilation is the geographical proximity of European Muslim migrants to their home countries. This closeness allows for stronger ties to their home cultures, which can sometimes hinder full integration into the society of the host country. Failure of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism in Europe has been a topic of debate, with varying perspectives. Some argue that Europe allowed excessive immigration without demanding enough integration. This mismatch eroded social cohesion, undermined national identities, and degraded public trust. Others counter that the problem lies not in diversity itself but in racism. The truth is more nuanced. Multiculturalism has become a proxy for broader issues like immigration, identity, and political disenchantment. Different countries follow distinct paths. The UK emphasized equal political participation, Germany encouraged separate lives, and France favored assimilation. Regardless of the approach, the outcomes have been similar: fragmented societies, alienated minorities, and resentful citizens. Geopolitical agendas. US-EU collaboration in migration influx. The initial migrating groups of Turkish and East European descent Muslims, such as Albanians, integrated well into European society because they didn't come to create their own ummah. Instead, they sought assimilation, primarily as a labor force, and gradually built their systems, some in the mainstream and others in the underworld. The situation drastically changed post-2011 with the Arab Spring. A significant movement of Muslim populations, facilitated by Turkey in the United States, began during this period. European Union (EU) governments were too weak to assert autonomy by then. They complied with US strategies, allowing a massive influx of immigrants under the pretext of addressing Europe's declining population by providing a labor force. However, there was a clear lack of infrastructure and planning to integrate, assimilate, or employ these newcomers productively. Despite this, the EU accepted the influx, which was influenced by external pressures and possibly financial incentives. This can be seen as a collusion between the EU and the US, including the CIA and Pentagon, that facilitated this illegal immigration. The second phase, from 2012 to 2015, saw an influx of unskilled and unqualified refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and other countries who were not suited for the advanced labor needs of Europe's economy. European industries, like Volkswagen, required highly skilled labor for automation and technical tasks, not the unskilled labor that arrived. This mismatch was evident yet ignored, suggesting a deliberate conspiracy to inject a particular community into the EU. Clamping down on political determination. From 2015 to 2023 to 24, millions of these immigrants occupied government buildings and hotels, supported by taxpayers' money, without contributing to the economy. Unorganized violence increased, disrupting public life. Unlike the earlier Balkan and Turkish Muslim communities, whose underground activities didn't affect public life, the new wave brought visible and random violence, like stabbings and attacks on places like Charlie Hebdo. European citizens, seeing neither their labor issues resolved nor their tax money benefiting them, faced increased violence and felt politically stifled. Attempts to politically organize were suppressed. Political figures like Robert Fico faced assassination attempts, and leaders like Marine Le Pen, Viktor Orban, Geert Wilders, Nigel Farage, and Tommy Robinson were targeted. Even Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, faced challenges despite his alignment with Atlantic forces due to his strict stance on immigration in Poland. The situation highlights collusion between the EU and external forces, undermining nationalistic efforts and causing widespread social and political disruption. This third phase saw an active clampdown on any political determination to address these issues. Conclusion. The current socio-political landscape in Europe reflects the complex and multifaceted challenges of integrating a significant Muslim population into a continent with deep-seated secular and nationalistic values. The historical context of Muslim presence in Europe, coupled with recent waves of immigration, has heightened tensions and mutual distrust. These issues have been further complicated by economic instability, political maneuvering, and external influences. To move forward, European nations must address these challenges with a nuanced approach that balances the need for social cohesion with respect for cultural and religious diversity. Only through comprehensive policies and genuine efforts at mutual understanding can Europe hope to achieve a harmonious coexistence that honors its secular traditions and diverse populace.